Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled Captain's Failure to Respond to Crew's Warnings Killed Them All. This was Korean Air Cargo Flight 8509 that crashed on December 22nd, 1999. Now, I'm trying something new here, as you may have noticed, and I appreciate people's comments and suggestions and stuff, so it's led me to try a few new things. Not all of them appear to be successful yet, but I've got some better lighting coming too. But anyway, stay tuned for some improvements here, hopefully in the presentation. Hopefully I get better as I go on this. But anyway, let's talk about this accident. All right, so the Korean Airlines cargo flight took off from Tanskanet, Uzbekistan, en route to London Stansted Airport. Now, when they took off out of Tanskanet, they had a problem with the captain's attitude indicator. It was giving them erroneous information. Now, their flight was daylight VFR, and it's, of course, very easy to handle a problem like that when it's daylight VFR. And they saw they had a problem, and this is an old Dash 200 747, so it doesn't have the fancy glass displays. These are the old attitude indicators, the mechanical devices. And the captain was having a problem, so he switches it from the main to alternate. And when he does, he goes from the inertial navigation unit number 1, which drives his attitude indicator and systems, to the backup number 3. And when he did that, everything was fine. Okay, so they write that up, and they what they do is when they do that, they enter a code in the FRM, the fault reporting manual, and they enter this code, and it kind of says, hey, this is what happened. Now, part of this whole accident was the fact that when they got to London, the people there did not have an FRM book, and there was a little bit of breakdown in communication on what's exactly going along. But the crew entered the correct code, and this code says, hey, you replace INU number 1. That's the problem. That's the fault. Well, since they didn't have the book to properly troubleshoot it, they decided, well, we're going to take a look at this little sucker. And what the maintenance technician did was he took and he pulled the unit. And you see these little connectors here in the back of it. Gosh, I love these connectors. I'll talk about that in a second. But what they did was they found that on connector number 2, pin J1, and let me show it to you here. Right there. That's the little diagram of it. And they found that that pin was loose. And so they reset the pin, and it snapped into place. And the technician thought, well, that's it. I fixed the problem. Well, if you've ever worked with these connectors, you just absolutely love these suckers because, and I put a lot of these together. You have to solder each individual pin, and then you have to look at the connector. Now, if you can see the one on the right, you can see numbers there. And you got to get the pin in the right number so you got the pin in the right hole. Otherwise, you really screw things up. And these are just a lot of fun, and I'm glad I don't do that anymore. But basically, the technician pulled the attitude indicator, and you got the multiple pin things in back. Now, a lot of times we have on the airplanes down in the avionics bay, we got line replaceable units, LRU, the black boxes. And if you've ever heard the term when you've got a problem of, well, why don't we just re-rack it? Well, what you do is you pull the LRU unit out of the rack, and in this case, the connectors, it's not the type where you see on the left there where you twist it on. You twist it on or off by disconnecting. This just goes into the rack and makes contact. So by re-racking them, often you can get rid of little, maybe a bad connect or something like that. But the technician goes, oh, I got a loose pin here. I corrected it. But even from the wiring diagram, as I'm sure it was totally obvious to you, that pin wouldn't have caused this problem. So what he did was he fixed something that wasn't a problem. They figured that the pin was making good contact, so that wasn't the problem. But the technician figures, well, I did something to fix it, so it's fixed. Well, big problem there because the fault code said that's not what you do. You don't play with that. You go and you take and you replace the inertial navigation unit number 1. Now, there were some problems with this flight. The crew had some pushback issues. The DME was not working properly, and they had to make a turn on takeoff when they're taking out of London because of a noise-sensitive area. I think it was 1.5 DME. Well, the captain's very concerned and pretty preoccupied with the fact that the system is the DME isn't working properly. So he's kind of preoccupied with that. They have some push issues, and there was quite a bit of problem with crew coordination here, and that's one of the leading issues here, crew resource management. Now, they had actually taken from United Airlines our CRM program, and they were using it, but they still had cultural issues because the captain was a very experienced 747 captain, and the first officer was extremely unexperienced, like 160 some hours on the 747. So he was a little reluctant to speak up, and of course they had a culture of the captain is God, basically. And the flight engineer, although very experienced, was simply ignored. The co-pilot didn't speak up when he saw an issue with the attitude indicators, and the engineer 3 times said bank, bank, as they pitched up. Now they took off in weather that wasn't the best. It was a 400 to 500 foot ceiling with rain. Now the crew taking off from Tansconnet, of course, was a different crew than the ones that picked up the airplane in London. And when they took off from Tansconnet, like I said, it was day VFR, and the captain's attitude indicator was not responding properly. And what he did was he handed the aircraft over to the first officer to fly. And the first officer flew the aircraft. The captain realized by looking at all 3 attitude indicators what the error was. 2 out of 3, said one thing, and his wasn't making sense. And they also were looking out visually. So, hey, that works. So he switched to alternate. That used to be on the old 727s. We had a system like that too, where you could switch to the backup source for the attitude indicator, and you could be dispatched that way, and you could fly that way. But they brought it up to London, and the crews didn't talk to each other. There was a difference, of course, in the time between when the one came in, the other went out, and there was a miscommunication with the management. In fact, it was written up in the report that they never really documented the work that had been done. So we got a new crew. We got worse weather, taking off out of London. That's a big surprise. So when they took off there with, like I said, the issues with CRM and the captain not taking input from his other people, the captain's attitude indicator stayed basically wings level. He continued to roll to the left for the noise abatement turn at 1.5 DME that he had to make. He didn't want to get violated on noise, so he's rolling left, and they're getting the disagreement with the bank angle, and it's calling it out. They're getting visual warnings. They're getting oral warnings. They silence it 3 times. The second officer calls bank, bank, and he calls that essentially slightly different phraseology, but he calls it essentially 3 different times. And the captain never responds to the input to the crew members. And the co-pilot, there comes a point when you need to save your life, sort of thing, but the culture did not permit this. Now they had a attitude indicator fault enunciated 3 times. The captain should have switched it over to the standby INU, Inertial Navigation Unit, which had taken it to standby number INU number 3, and that would have fixed the problem. He didn't do that. Why the first officer didn't call out or even take command of the aircraft, but with their culture, taking command from the captain, especially by a very young and inexperienced first officer, was just not something that they would go for. Fortunately, CRM now has improved. I mean, this is only 25 years ago, but still, CRM has improved a lot. And at most of the U.S. airlines, it had improved by the 2000s. It had improved to the extent where this wouldn't have happened, as it had more of a tendency to happen in the olden days, as you want to refer to it. When I started flying for the airlines back in the very early 80s, 79 into 80s. We still had the Captain is God complex, but it was changing. Of course, all the people who needed CRM were not the ones who responded to it, but they've all retired, and now we've got a very good culture where Hopefully an accident like this would never happen. The first officer would speak up. The first officer would take control of the aircraft, even a very young one, when he's looking at his attitude indicator, the standby attitude indicator, both saying, hey, this is wrong, and the captain following a failed attitude indicator, especially when they cancel the oral and visual warnings 3 times. Now, one thing I might mention, also part of the issue with the way they analyze the problem is the attitude indicator didn't have the problem. The captain's attitude indicator was fine. It was the INU number 1 that had the problem. So when they found the faulty pin where they reset it, and these pins click into place, so that's a nice feeling that, hey, that pin was loose and I clicked it into place, so that's wonderful. And they pressed the test on the attitude indicator. If you remember these old attitude indicators, they had a little button that you pressed and the thing would come up and you get a climbing turn, and that test shows that it's operating fine. Well, the attitude indicator was fine. That wasn't the problem. And interestingly enough, you see the hole here. The thing made pretty good hole. 747, full of fuel, planning on a fairly long flight down to Milan, so it had plenty of fuel. So it was pretty good fire. But they recovered the attitude indicator, and they actually sent it back to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to Collins Radio there that had produced the old mechanical attitude indicator, and that's just 25 miles from where I live in Iowa City. And when I was doing science fair stuff, I digress, okay. When I was doing science fair stuff, I used to go up to Collins Surplus, and I bought my first oscilloscope there for $15. And I would buy all sorts of various pieces of electronic gear at extremely reduced prices that a high school kid with not a lot of money could afford. So anyway, they analyzed the attitude indicator. Even though it was in pretty bad condition, they determined that it was functioning properly. And it was a very sophisticated and complete accident analysis of all the systems. And basically it came down to that it was INU number 3. But the thing that really killed him, because you don't die with 1 out of 3 attitude indicators failing. That shouldn't kill you. They died because of improper management of the crew. Anyway, trying a few new things here, camera angles, and I'm going to get a little bit better lighting here shortly too. Hopefully that'll work better. But let's see how this works. Thanks for watching.